You see him on the news.
CNN.com contributor, Dean Obeidallah. So, Dean...
Watch him at comedy clubs.
When I say Mecca, do you think of a holy place or an urban clothing line?
Read his articles. And you hear him on the radio. The Dean Obeidallah Show is on live right here on SiriusXM Progress, Channel 127.
And welcome to the show, brothers and sisters of the Resistance. Thursday, January 10th. Daily reminder, we're day 20 of Donald Trump's shutdown tantrum. We should call it Donald Trump's tantrum. Day 20 of Trump's tantrum, which he shut down the government because he only cares about his base. He doesn't care about the rest of America. Donald Trump will never be the president of the United States, nor does he want to be. He is just the mad king of his base. That's all he is. It'll always be. Right now, the shutdown is impacting nearly 1 million workers who have not been paid since before Christmas. Think about that if you're paid weekly and depend on a paycheck every week. If you are not paid since right before Christmas, how would that impact your life? That's what 1 million workers are going through right now. Nearly 1 million workers are going through. It's also affecting everything from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to airport security, to food inspections, to airplane inspections, the National Weather Service, business owners, and the list goes on. But first, my friends, here's Stephen Colbert last night talking about Trump's speech the night before and paying for the wall and who's going to pay for it. Let's hear clip number 1, please.
Trump has got a lot of heat because he said Mexico would pay for the wall. And, but last night he found another way to pay for it.
The border wall would very quickly pay for itself. The cost of illegal drugs exceeds $500 billion a year, vastly more than the $5.7 billion we have requested from Congress.
I'm pretty sure he just suggested selling drugs to pay for the wall.
Funny stuff by him. By the way, Donald Trump today, and I know you all have to work and don't follow every stupid thing Trump says, but I do, and I'm paid to do that. And I will watch his stupidity for you so you don't have to lose any brain cells. I have to sleep an extra hour tonight to get these brain cells back. But Donald Trump today, and I won't play the clip, literally denied, I'm not kidding, literally denied to the press that he ever said Mexico was going to pay for the wall, because he said, I never said Mexico was going to directly pay for the wall. It's his new one. And of course, fact checkers, some of them had strokes and fell on the floor, but others regained their senses and put out numerous things where he said things like, Trump, I will build a great wall on our southern border and I will have Mexico pay for that. Mark my words. And more specifically, in campaign papers, actually written papers, position papers by the Trump campaign in August 2015, the position paper said Mexico must pay for the wall, and they will, and we will impound all remittance, that is, of Mexicans back to Mexico who are living in America till they pay for it. In April 2016, a campaign memo said Mexico would, quote, make a one-time payment of $5 to $10 billion for the wall. Why I'm fact-checking this stupidity is because I refuse to normalize Donald Trump's lies. We can't allow him to do that. He wins. If truth no longer matters, the winner is Donald Trump. So we had to. Then here's Colbert quickly on a little bit more on the speech. Really funny line. Here's clip 2.
He wasn't done saying his ideas weren't his ideas.
At the request of Democrats, it will be a steel barrier rather than a concrete wall.
Mr. President, steel slats are not the metal bars we want you behind.
Place went crazy. Exactly. So let's talk about what is going on right now. We had Donald Trump in that speech 2 nights ago ginning up the fear of undocumented immigrants, making it seem like everyone who's not a documented immigrant is actually a rapist and murderer. Then Sean Hannity, of course, last night, doing his job as part of the Trump administration, and that's what he is. And today, by the way, Sean Hannity is tagging along with Trump at the border and getting an exclusive interview, which is going to air on his show tonight. But so last night, Sean Hannity talked about, again, the same line. The idea of undocumented immigrants are slaughtering Americans. And here's we'll play the clip of it. And on the screen, when he goes, look at these names, are names of Americans who have been killed by undocumented immigrants. It's kind of curious, though. I'll tell you what I find curious afterwards. Here's clip 3.
You will not see on any other network. And we're going to show you what are real victims of the crisis at our southern border. Look at the side of your screen. Take a look there. Men, women, husbands, wives, children, parents. Those are all human beings that have been killed because we have unsecure southern border. Those are real names. That includes police officer Ronald Singh. He was gunned down by that illegal immigrant just after Christmas.
So on the screen, I counted it. He showed 25 names. And I went back and Googled some of them. Yes, and everyone I went through was killed by undocumented immigrants. There's no denial about that. What he left out is a couple of interesting things. One is, first of all, in those 25 names that his researchers had to find, they went back to names people who were killed in 2008, 11 years ago, because it's that hard to find people who've been killed by undocumented immigrants. Second, what's interesting is he left out how many of them were killed. And there's a reason why he left them out. And I'll share why. For example, he mentioned the police officer, Ronald Singh, who was killed by an undocumented immigrant. He was killed by a gun. He mentioned in his list there Jamal Shaw, killed in 2008. Shaw was killed 11 years ago by an undocumented immigrant with a gun. Sabrina Starr was on his list, 2018. As you probably would imagine, she was killed by a gun. But they won't talk about gun violence because he had 25 names that he had to find over 11 years to put on his screen, while yesterday, 30 Americans died of gun violence. Yesterday, including 5 to 8 children. Today, 30 Americans will die by gun violence. Tomorrow, 30 Americans will die by gun violence. And the list goes on and on and on. There's no concern when Americans are killed by other Americans by gun violence, because that goes against their base. They are owned by the NRA, at least in their brain they are, and they will not have any empathy or sympathy for Americans killed by other gun violence unless it works for their political agenda. We all remember Laura Ingraham actually mocking the survivor at Parkland, Florida, the high school, Marjorie Douglas High School, because to them, even children who survive gunshots and then call for gun reform to save American lives should be silenced. So they won't talk about the fact that many on his list were killed by gun violence. Others were killed in car crashes. So the idea that it was an undocumented immigrant and somehow that's the reason they were in a car crash is challenging, but the names on the list were truly victims. They were killed by undocumented immigrants over a long period of time. I wish every day on the news in the future, we would say the names of the 30 Americans killed by gun violence every single day. And also say the immigration status of the person who killed them. So Americans would hear that primarily, if not exclusively, they were killed by native-born Americans. So today they'd say, today, Joe Smith was killed by John Reynolds, a native-born American. In Texas, Bob Lilly was killed by, Steve Jones, a native-born American. And over. And then you say, wow, there's a lot of native-born Americans committing crime. We really should do something about that, shouldn't we? No, they won't. Now, when I saw that list of people killed and they reached back to 2008 to find names, it reminded me of the way how they used to demonize Muslims. Because they would say, look at all these people killed by Muslim terrorists to try to gin up fear of all Muslims. Being Muslim myself, I was very aware of it, something I noticed and wrote about. If they could do it for black people, they would. But at least in our society, except for Tucker Klansman's show, you really can't do that. But here we are. We have Sean Hannity out with Donald Trump today on the campaign trail, down at the border, trying to make the case for an emergency. But as you cut away, we went through it over and over and over. There's no need to fact check. Shep Smith did a great job fact checking Donald Trump. Lie after lie about why you need this wall. That's the reality. So when you peel away the policy reasons, you are left with an other. There's another reason you're left with. And the media is timid to talk about it because I guess they don't want to piss off Trump supporters. When you take away the real policy reasons, you're left ultimately with white supremacy. And some might go, well, that's a stretch. Well, thankfully today, Congressman Stephen King made it no longer a supposition or speculation. Congressman Steve King from Iowa, let me remind you about this piece of garbage. And he won re-election, unfortunately, in Iowa. This is a man who made headlines last year for endorsing Toronto, Canada, the guy's from Iowa, but he had to endorse a candidate for mayor in Toronto, Canada, with neo-Nazi ties who had trivialized the Holocaust. On Twitter, he follows an Australian anti-Semite who proposed hanging a portrait of Hitler in every classroom. Congressman Stephen King has called long before Trump for the fencing in the wall on the border. He called for an electric fence on the border. Why? He said, because we do that with livestock all the time. And in 2013, Congressman Stephen King, a Republican, a leading ranking member of the GOP, said about Dreamers that For every young dreamer who becomes a school valedictorian, there are, quote, 100 out there that they weigh 130 pounds and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert. That's Congressman Stephen King. Today in an interview in the New York Times, while defending the wall, folks, while defending the wall to the New York Times, white supremacy happened to come up. And what did he say? Stephen, and there's no audio, so I'll have to read it to you. Quote, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? He asked. He said, why did I sit in class teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? White nationalist, white supremacist. How did that language become offensive? Said Stephen King. Then he went on to say about the Democratic Party, you could look over there and think the Democratic Party is no country for white men. Finally, a GOP member of Congress, a senior member, speaking the truth, that he is motivated by white supremacy and white nationalism. Now, to be clear, what is white supremacy? We don't need to debate it. I went to the dictionary. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines white supremacy simply as this: a person who believes that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. Period. It's also the GOP platform for 2020. Like, this is what Donald Trump, this sums up Donald Trump. A man who has demonized African Americans, called Africa S-hole, wants to ban Muslims. And when I read the definition of white supremacy, something else came to mind. A famous speech that I've quoted on this show before from Alexander Stephens, March 21st, 1861. Alexander Stephens was the first vice president of the Confederacy, and he made a famous speech called the Cornerstone Speech, hence as in the cornerstone of the Confederacy. And he made it very clear for all who would see that the Confederacy and the Southern break from our United States of America was about white supremacy. Not about anything else, no bullshit revisionism, because I'll read the words of the Vice President of the Confederacy right here, who said point blank, our new government, speaking of the Confederacy, is founded upon, its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. That's the Confederacy. That's white supremacy. The idea that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to superior race is his natural and normal condition. Now, we're way beyond slavery, thank God, but we're not beyond white supremacy. And it's not just young guys in Charlottesville. It's people in Congress and in the White House. And to me, Trump and Stephen King, they're buddies cut from the same cloth or the same white hood. And we now have Donald Trump on the verge of declaring a national emergency. There's more reporting, and I'm so glad we covered it in great detail. The National Emergencies Act and what it stands for. If he declares it tomorrow, we'll go through it again to remind everyone. But you have Donald Trump and Mike Pence out there lying to try to convince the American people to spend billions of dollars to do something not based in reality. And it reminds me so much of George Bush and Dick Cheney in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003. Lying to the American people, and the result was hundreds of thousands of people died, and we spent trillions of dollars to do it. And now Donald Trump on the verge of preparing us for a national emergency. Here's the truth. Donald Trump, call for your national emergency. Go ahead, do that. Circumvent Congress, spend over $5 billion of our tax dollars without congressional approval. Make yourself the king that you want. Because guess what? When the next Democrat president comes in, guess what we're getting day one? Medicare for all. After that, guess what? We are going to take your guns. Where's Kendall? Kendall, we're going to have a president that's going to take your guns, and there's nothing you can do about it. Unless you stand up to Trump now, there's no limits to executive power. So we're not going to actually take your guns, but I would say this. A Democratic president gets in, can't pass universal background checks in Congress. Guess what you do? You sign them, declare national emergency. 30 Americans are dying every day by gun violence. 90 altogether with guns, including the 60 that commit suicide with guns. We need to save American lives. We're going to have universal background checks, and we're going to ban AR-15's and a limit on gun-size magazine to 10 bullets. Enjoy that. And you know who you can thank for that? Donald Trump. So if that's what you want, go along with Trump becoming a king. Because a Democrat will be president at some point, I think likely in 2021. And if you think we're going to play nice after this bullshit we've been through, you're kidding yourself. So if you support Donald Trump to become a king, expect the next Democrat because we're going to push that Democratic president to do the same thing and impose our wish list, our dream list, circumvent Congress, spend your tax dollars without your consent or your input. Enjoy that. Or even Trump supporters stand up and say to Donald Trump, tell your member of your House and the Senate, this is wrong. This is too far. If you can't get Congress to approve it, that's life. You can make it the issue of 2020, make it a referendum in America on building a wall, and U.S. taxpayers will pay for it. And if America reelects Donald Trump and a Republican Congress, that's it. But if you don't stand up, guess what? Next Democratic president, our wish list, we don't even start with Congress. Just signs it, declares emergency after emergency. That's very dangerous for the United States of America. Remember on the right, they would say Obama's a dictator and a king and a tyrant because he wants to prevent deportations of young people brought here by their parents when they were children with DACA. Well, you actually have Donald Trump here not be able to get approval from Congress. He couldn't get it for 2 years when the Republicans controlled the Senate and the House, and now on the verge of declaring an emergency. What's a bigger emergency? 30 Americans dying by gun violence every day, 90 altogether? And you can't get Congress to pass a law to save anyone's lives? I mean, we lose 90 Americans a day involving guns. 60 to suicide, 30 to gun violence. And if anyone goes, well, you can't stop suicide, you're uninformed. You can. Because in states where they have 3-day waiting periods to buy a gun, the suicide rate has gone down. Why? Common sense. You're desperate. You've lost your way. You want to take your life. You go to a gun store, you buy it, they hand you a gun, you go home, you kill yourself. But if you have to wait 3 days after trying to buy the gun, things happen in between. You get help. There's an intervention. Whatever you're going through changes. It saves lives. So yes, there are laws that can save lives even from suicide involving guns. So you know what? Go ahead, Donald Trump. Make my day. Declare your emergency because the next Democratic president better, because we're going to push them, do everything we want. It's over. The experiment of the United States as a republic ends when Donald Trump declares a national emergency. It's over. So I don't think we're going to go to the streets and scream. I don't see that. I think we're just going to wait till we take over and do everything we want. Good luck with that. It's your choice, America. So what do you think, Democrats? Do you think we should actually on some level say, you know what, Trump, go ahead, declare your emergency. Because the next Democratic president, we're going to do everything we want. Doesn't matter who controls Congress. We're going to declare emergency based on real or false things. Who gives a crap? That's where we are. Think about what Trump has done. It's not the idea of destroying norms of politics. He is literally elevating himself to king in front of our eyes, undermining Congress and spending $6 billion up to $25 billion of our dollars without Congress's approval. And Republicans are not outraged by this? Then you're full of shit, and you always have been. It's up to you. What are you going to be? 866-997-4748. Be right back. At this point, the question is not who connected to Donald Trump as a criminal. The question is anyone connected to Donald Trump who's not a criminal?
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
SiriusXM Progress.